or who are outside of Texas. So with those audience groups in mind, as well as our San Antonio Audubon Society members, some attendees may already know much of what I'm going to be talking about, but hopefully all viewers will be able to come away with at least some new tidbit of information to them. So let's get started. Let's talk about the park. Phil Hardberger Park really is one of San Antonio's newest natural treasures. Here's a map of the park. I want you to kind of, if you don't know where it is, have some idea where it is as we're talking. It's in north central San Antonio. It's bounded by Blanco Road, which is on the right side of the map, Northwest Military on the left side of the map, and through the middle of the park, or close to the middle, it runs Wurzbach Parkway. So there are two main entrances to the park. One you'll see on the right side there, it's called the east entry off of Blanco. On the left side of the map, you'll see the west entry off of Northwest Military Highway. This is a confusing map to people who think maps should always have north at the top of the screen. In this case, north is not at the top of the screen. And at the point where Wurzbach Parkway goes through the park, what we call the east side really should be the north side. What we call the west side really should be the south side. But because all the maps say east and west, that's what I'm going to say today. Just bear in mind, that's not really what it is. There's also a small entrance, a second small entrance off of Blanco Road, slightly outside of this map. And it's not a main entrance, as I say, and it is another way to get back to the Salado Creek Greenway parking lot and to the Volker Homestead. Here's the main entrance off of Blanco Road, not the small one. You won't even know that you're at an entrance if you're at the small one. But here's the main entrance off of Blanco Road. And I would point out to you, we've got those rocks inside a metal cage, and that is called gabion, G-A-B-I-O-N. You may know about it. I had never seen it or heard the word before I came back to San Antonio in 2009, then I started seeing it all over the place. But it's really kind of neat because basically gabion is a bunch of rocks about that size. Could be smaller, could be larger, but usually they're about that size in some kind of metal structure. And, you know, part of the goal in the park was to use natural looking features. And if there's anything that's naturally occurring in north central San Antonio, it is rocks. Let me assure you, we got plenty of those. Okay, so the next is a photo of the main entrance off of Lock Hill Selma. And a lot of people come in this way. It's a little bit confusing at first because that sign actually, when you're on Northwest Military, blends into the trees behind it, so it's really easy to miss. So if you're coming like from downtown San Antonio out Northwest Military, if you get to Wurzbach Parkway, you've missed this entrance and you got to turn around and go back. The park itself is 311 acres. It's it rivals Brackenridge Park in size. 204 acres are on the west side, 107 are on the east side. There's a land bridge being built that's going to join the two sections. And it actually is going to add an acre or two to the size of the park. So we've been jokingly call it the fastest growing park in San Antonio. And I'll have a picture of the land bridge a little bit later. Here's a map. And as we're looking at maps, before I go to each section that I'm talking about, you'll see a circle on the some sort of a shape around the area that we're going to be talking about. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about the farmstead area, where the park area was originally owned by Max and Minnie Volker, V-O-E-L-C-K-E-R, and that is the Volker farmstead is still on the property, and it's now a piece of history right here on the property. So, but it's important to know that even before Max and Minnie and their ancestors came to that property, there has been found evidence of American Indian habitation along the Salado Creek, alongside the farmstead area. Actually, 2 archaeological digs were done shortly after City of San Antonio purchased the property, and that indicated evidence of American Indian encampments. After those digs, the sites were then recovered, and their location actually has been redacted from information online about them to protect them for future research. There's a book that's been written about Max and Minnie and where they lived. But the property ownership, the land ownership, started when in 1841, when a fellow named John Coker, who was a veteran of the Battle of San Jacinto, got first-class head rights along the Salado Creek near Blanco and 281 today. And he established what later became called the Coker Settlement. If you go over into that area, there's the Coker Methodist Church. There are a lot of things that start with the name Coker. So over time, there came to be a lot of dairies in this area, and the area became known as Buttermilk Hill, thus part of the name of the book. Both Max and Minnie were descendants of some of the early settlers in that community. And in 1917, Max's father, Louis Volker, purchased the property that includes the historic farmstead today. And at that time, there was there might have been a barn, but there also definitely was what we'll call the old stone dwelling, which is this. And I've seen pictures of it when the city acquired the property. It looked nothing like this. It was pretty beaten up. It's probably from the 1860s. And it had been well used, and then for a number of years not used at all. But when Max and Minnie married in 1927, Max was probably living in that old stone house. The family story goes that Minnie would not marry him unless she had a house with modern conveniences of the time. So he agreed to build a bungalow. So it's a 1920s bungalow that is still on the property, and we'll take a look at that later. They operated a dairy for quite a few decades. At first, they sold directly to customers, and then later they sold wholesale to Knowlton's Creamery on Fredericksburg Road near I-10, which is where the Oak Hill Farms Creamery is now, and it's close to a place near and dear to my heart as I was growing up, the Cool Crest Miniature Golf Course. With the changing times, small dairies couldn't remain profitable, so in the end, they sold out of the dairy business and moved into raising cattle. So over the years, the property was bisected by Northwest Military. That happened in 1941, and then again by Wurzbach Parkway after Max's death in 1980. Minnie actually continued to live in the bungalow until near the time of her death at age 96 in the year 2000. They didn't have any children, and so after Max passed away, Minnie created the Max and Minnie Volker Trust, to which she deeded all of her property, and that was in 1991. The property included, at that time, what is now Phil Hardberger Park, but also the Alon Shopping Center property. There's the Adante Senior Living, and there are a couple of subdivisions with single-family dwellings. All that was owned by Max and Minnie, and frankly, when I was doing some research a couple of years ago, I realized that that property where our house is now was at one time owned by the Volkers too. That was quite a bit longer ago. Income from the trust that she established was dedicated to supporting Christus Santa Rosa Children's Hospital, the children at Boysville, and medical research. In about 2006, the trust decided to put the property up for sale, and Bonnie Connor, who was our area's city council member at the time, saw the sign about the sale and immediately called Mayor Phil Hardberger about it, telling him he'd better come out and see that property right away because it was going to sell fast. And there had been talk that they were looking for a way to acquire more park property for the city, and this could be the place. So he went out that very day with the city manager, Scully, and decided that it was exactly what the city needed. A bond issue was already in play, so the funding was added into that bond issue. Part of the property was purchased by the city in 2006, and the rest of the property in 2007. After the property purchase, the city of San Antonio embarked on creating a master plan for what they were calling Volcker Park. That was the working name at the time, was Volcker Park. The plans included some type of development over 25% of the park, with the remaining 75% devoted to quote, quote, cultivated wild area, which meant that the native Texas landscape would be carefully restored. The park naturalists began surveying the area for the plants that were there, the birds that were there, the reptiles that were there, etc. And along the way, the city council decided to change the name, and this was before the park actually opened, change the name to Phil Hardberger Park to honor the former mayor who had had the foresight to understand what a world-class park this property could be for the city of San Antonio. Now, at that time, some people had consternation over the name change. They thought it was the Volcker property. It should continue to be named Volcker, but the city actually bought the property from the trust. It was not given to the city, and in my mind, it made sense to me that that name change was appropriate. Also part of the park, the area where Max and Minnie lived was designated a city landmark in 2008, and then received National Register of Historic Places designation in 2014. There's quite a rigorous way that you have to go, method you have to go through to become a historic place in the National Register. But they did it, and in 2014 it became part of that. It got that designation, and it's called the Volcker Farmstead Historic District. This original stone house was restored according to the plan that an architectural firm named Fisher Heck Architects put together for it. Because the house had been abandoned for so long, the architectural firm faced quite a few issues in the restoration, not the least of which were termites and substantial flea infestation and substantial dry rot also. Now that stone building, that stone dwelling that you see here has new life as the offices for the Phil Hardberger Park Conservancy. And I'll talk about the Conservancy in a bit. For the birders in the group, here's my first talk about birds. When we were doing the bird survey, the monthly bird survey, we frequently saw during the summer chimney swifts in this area. So I talked with the architect to see if maybe that chimney was unlined or whether they had lined it. If it was unlined, that might be where those chimney swifts were spending the night. Well, he wasn't really sure. So we asked permission to stay in the park past dusk, and Alan, our friend Laura Reynolds, and I got permission to sit near the building one evening and watch for chimney swifts to go in the chimney. We didn't have any luck. But just because they don't go in one night doesn't mean that they're not going in other nights. So we're not sure yet, but there could be chimney swifts spending the night in that chimney. There's also a restored barn on the property, and that restoration took place between 2011 and 2013. It was privately funded by the Conservancy, with many, many hours of labor donated by member organizations of the Associated General Contractors Leadership Forum here in San Antonio. The historic farmstead area also includes an old cistern, a working windmill. That was not the windmill that was there, but it was moved in. It's a windmill that's very much like the original windmill that was actually working, and that was moved over from someplace else that the city owned. There's a garage there, and then the 1920s bungalow that we'll see later. And also within this historic district, there's a children's vegetable garden, and also something that's called the Butterfly Learning Center, or the BLC, as we call it, which Master Naturalist Drake White was instrumental in establishing and maintaining. She still maintains it with a group of Master Naturalist volunteers. The historic district is fenced in, and you have to have special permission to get access to it. Alan and I were part of the bird survey group starting in about late 2009 or 2010. And we've been part of it ever since. The bird survey, though, was started by Georgina Schwartz, who is in the front of this picture. on the left front in 2008. And at that time, the bird list for the park included 51 species. In striking contrast, the 2020 bird list from Phil Hardberger Park now stands at 158 species. There are several reasons for this substantial increase in the total. One of them is this monthly birding survey that Georgina has done, and she has been doing this for quite a long time now, very faithfully, I must say. And also, the more eyes you have in an area, the more birds you're going to get spotted. And nowadays, we have very good ways to document these findings. So birds, more people there seeing more birds and documenting more birds. And as more visitors yet, more birders visit yet, we'll be able to document more birds. Another key to the increase in species observations is that the restored savanna area, which has taken a section of basically overgrazed ranch land back to its original savanna condition. This change created food and habitat for the reentry of quite a few bird species that were probably here many years ago, but that had moved away as their life necessities declined in abundance. Now we're going to move to talk about the first good birding area, and that is the restored savanna. Oops. Oh, first I wanted to show you the bird list. This is the page 1 of the bird list that Alan and I have created specifically for Phil Hardberger Park, and we update it every year so that people can see what birds have actually been seen there. Now we're going to the savanna area. We're back to our map. And we have a polygon there that is around a dark outline around the savanna area. The definition of savanna is a grassland with some shrubs and some scattered trees that aren't close enough to make a canopy. The various native grasses in this restored savanna provide the food for our seed-eating birds and cover for building nests and for hiding from predators. The root system in the grasses also helps to stabilize the soil, and it prevents erosion, and it actually holds rainwater so it can soak into the ground, and it reduces the amount of runoff that comes away from the property. And long before the farming days, the former prairie area was shaped for many years by grass fires and the migration of buffalo, way back before anybody can remember, that's for sure, or anybody that's here can remember. Farming and ranching on the land left it, unfortunately, with very few of these native grass species. And as soon as the city purchased the property, work began to return the area to its former glory by seeding and planting native grasses. And I'll name a few off: big blue stem, little blue stem, eastern gamma grass, Indian grass, side oaks grama, upland seagrass, inland sea oaks, and Texas cup grass. Also in the savanna, we have some public artwork. An artist named Ann Wallace installed this artwork called Golden Age, and it's to make one think of the prairie fires as the small discs flicker on this wheel. And you can sort of see some glistening going on there. But when you see it in real life, you can almost, if you get close enough down on that trail that's visible there, you can hear them clinking, and they catch the light whenever a small breeze hits the wheel. If you ever go to the Urban Ecology Center, there's a sign about that artwork off on the back deck. And now I'm going to be talking about some of the birds that we've seen there. The bird survey is in the morning, pretty early in the morning, and about 8 o'clock. And it means that the light is generally really good. And that's a nice thing. So here we've got some Baltimore Orioles. Laura Reynolds got a really great shot of them with the sun hitting them just right. We really only see, San Antonio sees Baltimore Orioles during migration. They don't generally stay here. The next bird is a loggerhead shrike. It's also known fondly as the butcher bird. Some people describe it as a songbird with raptor habits. It eats insects, but it also eats small birds, lizards, and small mammals. The reason it gets that butcher bird name is that it often skewers its prey on thorns or barbed wire, since that was invented, as part of its mating ritual, to show a potential mate that it can find food. It also makes it easier to eat. It's sort of like it's got its own skewer. And sometimes the birds store it there. If they're full, they'll come back and eat the insect or bug or little mammal, whatever it is, later. I always think of the loggerhead shrike as the loggerhead shrike version of planning your leftovers for the fridge. Okay, chipping sparrow. People who are around chipping sparrows a lot often call them chippies, and they generally only spend the winter with us, and then they breed much farther north. When we lived in Minnesota, we saw them, actually we had them breeding in our neighborhood. The non-breeding chippies that are here are not quite as colorful as when they are in the breeding areas, like so many birds that migrate north to mate, but they still are quite colorful. That rusty spot on its head is pretty nice all year round. They do make some chipping noises here, but when you get up into their breeding area, they have this lovely, gentle, loud trilling sound, and you know that you hear that and you know the chippies are back. Here's a common ground dove. This is the smallest dove that we see in our area. It's actually not often seen. It's about the size of a good-sized sparrow. But another distinction besides the size, which is notable, is that it has on its bill, it often has that dark pink or red at the base of the bill, if you can see it there. It's with us year round, but like I say, we just don't often see it. So it was a nice find that day that Laura picked it up. We get indigo buntings during migration. Only during migration, and when they are fully mature and in breeding plumage, that kind of iridescent blue that you see on this bird is all over the male females. And if the sun's not hitting them, they look black, and when the sun hits them in full blue breeding plumage, they just turn into this amazing iridescent blue. It's very fun to see them here. And here's a merlin. It's a small falcon that actually spends the winter with us, as does another small bird, a small raptor, the American kestrel. I don't have a picture of the kestrel here, but they're both winter visitors. The merlins are a little darker than the kestrels in coloration, and they lack the dark facial, what they call mustache slashes. The merlin has a sort of a slash on its face like that. The kestrel has a very dark slash like that. And that's one of the best ways to tell those two apart. And here's a wonderful photo from this spring. It's a crested caracara. Actually, they're also known around here as the Mexican eagle. And until about 30 years ago, you had to go down into the valley, which is the way southern tip of far south Texas to see one. But their range has been moving steadily north for some time now. And it's great to see these juveniles because that's a good indicator that the area supports it. It's a good ecosystem for creating families. And this guy has a little ways to go before he's very good looking, but he's kind of a cute little guy. Other birds continue to change their range too. Blue jays are another good example. I'm not going to have a photo of it, but blue jays, most people know. And when I was growing up in San Antonio, we did not have blue jays here. The first blue jay I ever saw was when I moved to Houston to go to the University of Houston in 1968. Here's a verdin. I love these little guys. It's about the size of a chickadee. It has a bright yellow face. It's not quite as bright as it usually looks in this photo. And it also has a reddish spot on the front of its wing. Now you can't see that because there's a branch in the way. Verdins are not too often seen in Hardberger Park. They are most likely to be spotted in Bexar County in the southern part, in more of the thorny South Texas scrub areas. In fact, at the Land Heritage Institute, we found a nest, an active nest once down there, and the nest is it was recently active. The babies had already left, but the nest was a ball-shaped mass of thorny sticks on the outside, and it was if you could have looked inside, it would have had grasses and feathers and plant fibers. Now we're going to our next spot, and Alan had something to do. He was instrumental in getting this bird water feature put together. You can see there's a cardinal on the right-hand side there, close to the Salado classroom, and that's the symbol for the bird water feature. It's kind of off the beaten track, but that's kind of a point. You don't want to be in some place that has a lot of people going around. We call this a palisade style blind. A lot of the old forts in the old days had big sticks like this, and that were made into a wall for the fort, and so they called this style palisade because that's what it was called in the old days for the forts. You put a blind there to keep the birds from noticing that people are watching them, moving around, watching them, and through that middle hole, basically in the middle of the blind, in the middle of the screen, you can see the stone water fountain, not fountain, the water feature back there. And actually when Alan designed this palisade and tried to figure out where to put the holes, he called Georgina Schwartz to make sure that he had a hole in that blind just at the right height for her. And he's proud of that. And that was a good thing. It took about 2 years to get the project approved and built. The water in the structure gently flows over the stones, and the structure is maintained by members of the Alamo Area Master Naturalist Group, Aubrey George, Laura Reynolds, and Alan Kuentz. The water for the feature is collected from the roof of the next door neighbor there, the Salado outdoor classroom, and then it's stored in a dedicated 3,900 gallon storage tank. So they should not easily run out of water, that's for sure. The water is recycled. 4 organizations worked together to put this bird feature to make it happen. San Antonio Audubon, Bayer Audubon, Alamo Area Master Naturalists, and the San Antonio Parks and Rec helped substantially in its construction. Now, we've seen a number of animals there, not just birds, and the first photo I'm showing you here is a recent photo. There were 3 male deer still in velvet drinking at the water feature. Every creature, just about every creature, needs water to survive. And we've been in kind of a little drought around here. We see a lot more deer at that feature when we are in a drought because the natural places where water might accumulate don't have any. Originally, we tried to do some landscaping around that. A friend and master naturalist colleague, Evelyn Penrod, and I did some nice plantings around it, and we were afraid the deer would eat them, so we put in deer-resistant plants, but the deer didn't eat them. The deer stomped on them. So it was more or less death by stomping for our beautiful little landscaped area. There is one autumn sage left. It periodically blooms, and it attracts hummingbirds when it does. I love these little guys. These black and white warblers are just great. A lot of the bird maps and the bird guides say that they don't live here, but they do. We've almost every winter have black and white warblers winter over here. Not many, but it's a real treat when we see them. And actually, I think probably they nest here too. They're here year round, but not very many of them. The first time I ever saw here in San Antonio was on a January morning when it was 17 degrees right outside of the Judson Nature Center in Alamo Heights. We had agreed to lead a bird walk there that morning, and nobody else showed up, as you can imagine. 17 degrees in San Antonio, everybody's hunkered down. So, but by golly, the birds came there, and one of these black and white warblers showed up. They come to the water feature with some regularity. We have a lot of northern cardinals here. People in San Antonio call them red birds, oftentimes, but the true name, the real name, is a northern cardinal. This bird gives us joy year-round. Now, this is a female or a juvenile, I'm not quite sure, but it's a seed eater, and if you have a bird feeding system in your backyard, it's often the first bird there in the morning and the last bird there at night. The males are just a brilliant red, and even the mostly brown females sport that little cute crest on their heads, and they have some really nice, lovely red accents. They range from the central U.S. over a bit to Arizona, but then to the east, to the eastern U.S. mainly. And here's a bathing northern cardinal, moving so fast, couldn't quite catch it, but this is one of Alan's favorite pictures. Birds have to take a bath, and so they come and use the water not just to drink, but they also use it to clean. You can imagine how a bird that weighs mere ounces has to clean off dirt particles, etc. Anything that collects on their feathers is going to weight them down substantially, and that added weight affects their ability to fly quickly. Here's a Carolina wren. It's one of the two major main wrens that we see here in San Antonio. We actually have the Carolina wren and its other wren compadre, the Buick's wren. Buick is B-E-W-I-C-K-S, and I'll have a picture of that later where you'll catch the spelling. They're both about the same size. They like to be in the same places. They probably eat the same insects. And a lot of people have trouble distinguishing between the two of them. They're quite similar. But this one is definitely a rusty red or a reddish rust. And the Buick's is much more of a gray overall color. And that's the easiest way to tell the two apart. And here's the last photo from the bird water feature. This is a golden-fronted woodpecker. It's the largest woodpecker that we have in our area. For those who live places where a pileated woodpecker would be larger, we don't have them here. The closest place is maybe 60 or so miles to the east of us. But this is our big one, and this is a male. And I love the way he's hanging on to the top of it. He's having trouble figuring out how he can get down there to get the water. It's not a tree, and he's having trouble. But anyhow, they do come periodically and drink with us, and they are year-round, and they nest here. Next, we're going to go to the Wildscape, the Master Naturalist Wildscape Demonstration Garden, and there's an oval on it. It's on the west side of the park. Simply put, a Wildscape Demonstration Garden is a place that provides the things that wildlife need to survive. Food, water, shelter, a safe place to create a new life. A demonstration garden is a place that demonstrates the kinds of plants that will help wildlife. In a place like San Antonio and many other places that are growing rapidly and we're losing our wild area, it's nice to know that people can landscape their yards with plants that are good for the animals. And this is a place where they can come and see something about those. 20 plus years ago, the second class of the Master Naturalists, Alamo area Master Naturalists, created a Wildscape Demonstration Garden along the San Antonio Riverwalk near where the river crosses Cesar Chavez Boulevard. So just south of the river from true downtown, from the Riverwalk area. They lovingly tended that park for about 20 years when the owner of the property, which ended up to be the San Antonio River Authority, decided to sell the property to a neighboring not-for-profit business. And then to help the Master Naturalists create a new garden, though, the San Antonio River Authority sold the property for a substantial sum above the appraised value, and the new owner was willing to pay that money. And then Sarah, the San Antonio River Authority, held that money for the Master Naturalist to use to build a new garden. So Judith Green, who is our garden sponsor and a Texas Parks and Wildlife urban biologist, Evelyn Penrod, who chairs the garden, and I spent substantial time evaluating options for a new location. And in the end, we decided that Phil Hardberger Park was the best place, in large part because of the high visitation that it was already getting, even though it was a new park. If we had a demonstration garden, we wanted it to be someplace where there were people to demonstrate to. And the good news is that Phil Hardberger Park saw us as good partners and agreed that they were a good place. So we hired Blue Heron Designs to create and implement the design, as well as plant the trees and some of the perennial plants. And now we have over 100 species of plants in the garden. So basically we have our own version of what I call HEB for wildlife. There is a video online about the garden in particular, and the resources sheet that I'll have at the end of this presentation will show you how to get there. This spring, the fire wheel, some people call it Indian blanket. It's an annual wildflower. It temporarily took over the area inside of the south gate. Now I'm going to show you, which made it really pretty, and it was amazing pollinator garden. I mean, it's always a good pollinator garden. It was amazing this spring. Now I'm going to show you some of the wildlife that's helped in the garden. This is a common buckeye butterfly on frog fruit. And frog fruit is, I love frog fruit. I think it's one of the most unappreciated ground covers in our area. Many of the small butterflies and moths and various species of smaller bees love the frog fruit for its nectar. This is a common checkered skipper on mealy blue sage. It's said, this butterfly is said to be the most common skipper in North America, and I have to say that until we put this garden together, I really had not noticed it before. In mild winters in the area, it can actually breed here year-round. This perennial that it's on, the mealy blue sage, blooms prolifically from April into October, especially if we get some rain, and we always hope for that. And it's a really great pollinator plant for the early butterflies coming through, and then the late ones coming through again in migration. Here's a monarch butterfly on the Greg's mist flower. In 2015, San Antonio declared itself a monarch champion city, and so many places have created gardens that are good for monarchs. One of the things, monarchs are unique in that they have to have milkweed for a couple of different parts of their life cycle. And so milkweed is one of those weedy kind of plants that people take out of their yards, and it's being taken out of a lot of different places. So monarchs are in trouble. And we're trying to do pocket gardens, etc., small gardens that have the things that they need. So that we have 3 different kinds of milkweed in the garden: antelope horns, zizzotes, milkweed, and we have a climbing milkweed vine. And here's a first cousin. I call them first cousins. I don't know whether they're really genetically related, but this is a queen butterfly on that Greg's mist flower again. Greg's mist flower seems to be kind of an irresistible plant to especially these 2 butterflies. I've heard people jokingly call it butterfly crack. Once they've tried it, it becomes an addiction, and they can't get away from it. And here's a Rickert's blue butterfly. This is a fairly small butterfly, an 1.25 inches, maybe 1.5 inches, on Texas bluebonnet. And Texas bluebonnet is our state flower, and it's an excellent pollinator plant, especially when it's blooming in early spring. And I love how the blue of the flowers bring out the blue on the body, close to the torso of this small and beautiful Rickert's blue butterfly. Here's a salt marsh moth caterpillar on a walking stick cholla. And I never would have expected to find a caterpillar on a plant that's as spiny as this one, but by golly, that salt marsh moth caterpillar, which is very hard to say, stayed there for quite some time. Most of the lizards that we have are rose-bellied lizards. This particular, they usually have quite a long tail. This one has lost most of its tail, and it's probably because some predator tried to grab it, snatch it, and one of their ways of saving their own lives, these little lizards, and quite a few lizards actually, is the tail snaps off, and the predator leaves with a tail that's not what they were really looking for, and the lizard goes on to see another day. Usually they will grow back that tail. We do have some Texas spiny lizards in the garden, and we also have some non-native Mediterranean geckos that show up every once in a while around an ant bed. And here's a walking stick, and I hope that you can see it there. It's on the fence, and it's kind of up and down. It looks like a twig. And sometimes, you know, they're very camouflaged to begin with, but sometimes they sway in the wind to make themselves look even more like a twig. It's an herbivore, and it really consumes mostly leaves. Here's one of my favorite plants in the garden. I always hate to pick just one, but it was blooming beautifully a couple of weeks ago. It's a desert willow. It's one of those plants that does all those things that we want in a garden. It has showy flowers. That's always fun. Those yellow lines inside the throat, in my mind, say to pollinators, you know, come on in. And it provides food for many animals, nectar to butterflies and hummingbirds. It's a larval host to the white-winged moth. It provides nesting material and structure for native bees, provides seeds for birds that love seeds. It's deer resistant, which helps us. I'm told that the nectar helps the bees make a really nice honey. It does well in the well-drained limestone soil that we have here. It's very heat tolerant, and it can also tolerate cold down to 10 degrees. And it grows really pretty fast. So there's hardly anything more that you could ask about something like that. And now we're going to go back to the birds. Eastern phoebe, it's one of our regular visitors at the garden. Actually, we have them in San Antonio year-round. They nest in the wild, but they also nest in our neighborhoods. They seem to have adapted very well to people being around. In fact, a phoebe pair nested across the street from our house, high up on a neighbor's front porch for several years, and the parent birds would come over while Alan was mowing and follow Alan around in the yard as he mowed, hoping that he'd turn up some tasty morsel as the mower passed over. And usually they would come away with some food. Here's a northern mockingbird that we've seen there in the garden. This is a juvenile. The northern mockingbird is our state bird of Texas. And it's also, once again, it's a good sign of the ecosystem is doing what it needs to do when we see juveniles out and about. Here's a lesser goldfinch. This is the goldfinch that we have year-round here. We have American goldfinches in the winter, and then just as they get pretty for breeding, they head north to our friends in the north. I took this photo one morning when I got over to the garden really early, and I flushed 12 or 15 goldfinches out of the fire wheel and the lemon bee balm that we had in the garden that had already gone to seed. So they were busy eating seed, and I disrupted their morning breakfast. Here's a mourning dove. It's one of the two main kinds of doves that we have here. Actually, we have more, at this point, we have more white-winged doves in this area than we do the mourning dove. But the white-winged dove they're kind of roughly the same. They sort of look alike. But the white-winged dove has a crescent white on the wing, a white stripe on the wing. And the mourning dove has a longer tail, and it's tapered, sort of has a point at the end. And while the white-winged dove kind of has a more blunt end of the tail. Red-shouldered hawk, he thought he owned the place for a while. You can take a look at that shoulder, and you can spot why it's called a red-shouldered hawk. There's a kind of a deep rusty red at the top of the shoulder. A black-shinned hummingbird. It's on the left-hand side if you haven't seen it yet. It's going to some red yucca. The red yucca isn't really red, and it isn't really a yucca, but oh well, it's called the red yucca. And the black-chinned hummingbird, it has a black chin when the light's not hitting it just right. But when the light hits it right, you see that jewel tone purple chin on it that's just amazing. Greater roadrunner, and this guy has a lizard in his mouth. Now, I got there early one morning, and I didn't mean to disturb the courtship, but I did. He was showing this mate that he was going to be able to take care of her and the babies. And so he was taking off, strutting around, and then took off when I got there, and the female followed close by him. So I think they raised their family close by. I don't know exactly where, but fairly near, because we have seen him off and on all summer. There's a wetland in the park that was created. It's over on the left-hand side of that map. Here's the trail down to the wetland. One of our neighbors, a building next to us, a development right outside of the park, had some irrigation system issues and parking lot runoff issues that created a soggy area in the park that really couldn't be used. So nature preserve officer at the time, Wendy Leonard, found a way to move things around and create a place farther down here with a viewing area where there is a wetland. And I don't have a picture of it, but we have seen black-bellied whistling ducks come out of there in the morning. So it's a nice, and other ducks too. So it's a nice place for wildlife that likes wetland. And it's also a good place for the water to filter out before it goes into the ground. And I think this is a hackberry tree. I'm not positive, but hackberry trees are great for wildlife. And this is some cedar waxwings that that were partaking of the berries of this tree, this hackberry. Hackberries are seen by a lot of people as trash trees, but it's amazing the wildlife that a hackberry will support. Next, we're going to go to the Salado Creek Greenway. The Salado Creek goes by the park over on the east side. And I'm going to go fairly fast through this. Here's a sign for the creekway. Oh yes, and we have a porta potty in back of that. The scenic porta potty is back there. And then here's a wooded hiking and biking path along the Salado Creek. It's a really peaceful place to go. You have to be careful because bikes and people are allowed on that trail. So you have to be cautious. You have to see where you are. But it's a very peaceful trail. And there are birds that nest there, such as a great horned owl family. They're just a little piece down from where that photo was taken. They had a nest there. In the daytime, they stay pretty quiet. As you probably know, owls feed at night. And they're not out hunting during the daytime, generally speaking, but you will see their silhouette up in the tree or maybe some movement up in the tree, and that's what grabs your attention. That's a pretty good sized bird, so when they do hunt, they get rats and mice, and they take rabbits and small hawks as well as skunks. So they have a very varied diet. There's also a cantilevered overlook over Salado Creek. That's a very nice place to be. That if you walked out on that deck, it overlooks the creek, and there are a couple of really nice benches there on a hot day. That's a good place to rest. Now we're going to go to the Volker Farmstead. You've seen this map earlier, but I wanted to put it there again to show where we're going. This is Max and Minnie's 1920s bungalow. This is what Max built for Minnie so that she would marry him. And I want you to take a look at in the forefront of the picture. There's a fence that's got barbed wire strung along it. And that barbed wire is a very popular place for birds. Before we get to the barbed wire, I'm going to go to the backyard of that house. And there is a sycamore tree in the back. And here's a great crested flycatcher that we got there one time. And also we've had a number of times, we've seen large groups of goldfinches in that tree. So now back to the fence. I'm going to go to the fence. Grasshopper sparrow. This is a cute little guy, and I love it that he was looking at Laura Reynolds as she was taking the picture. They make a kind of a buzzy noise, which is a lot like the grasshoppers that they eat. Grasshoppers just happen to be their main diet. And here's a Vesper sparrow. These are wintering sparrows that come to spend the winter with us. And this picture got a good look at those talons, and that's all I can call them. I mean, I would hate to be an insect on the business end of those talons. Its diet in the winter is mostly insects and seeds, but in the summer it eats mostly insects and some spiders too. Now, just about the time I look at those other two birds and say, man, those sparrows are not terribly exciting or colorful, along comes a lark sparrow. And it's really easy to recognize by these really bold facial features. And then it has a broad tail that has white on either side of it. And here's a scissortail flycatcher. That's one of my favorite birds, and we see them periodically in the park. They're more colorful than you might think at first glance. You can see from here, there's a kind of pinkish wash on its belly, but underneath that wing, if you ever are in a position where you can see under that wing, there's a real, it's a brightly colored salmon underneath its wing. And now we're going to go to Phil's tree. And this map is going to show you, there's a circle around where it is on the east side. This tree is where, when Phil Hardberger saw it for the first time, he was in awe of how big it was. And he declared that it and the surrounding land absolutely had to be preserved. And that's when I have heard him say that that is when he could be truly, honestly be declared a tree hugger, because he hugged that tree the first day. This is a reenactment. We were at a meeting of the Farm and Ranch Committee of the San Antonio Conservation Society, and he was making a presentation. We talked him into going out and showing us his tree, and he did a reenactment of his tree hug. And this is a Buick's wren, and it was hanging upside down. That is the way that it was. I mean, a bird will go to all extent to catch the insect that it needs to eat, and you can see he's really clinging onto that deeply etched bark there. Now we're going to move to the open fields on the west side. I know we're hopping around here. If you want to go birding in this area, you need to go early in the morning, because these basketball courts, these are pickup basketball courts, and there are people there who do morning workouts, and their instructor makes a lot of noise. So get there before 9, otherwise the yelling instructors will drive off some of the birds. Here's an eastern peewee. I love this little bird. It's usually not in a terribly conspicuous place, so you often hear it but don't see it. And I don't do a very good imitation, but here is what it sounds like to me. It goes, peewee, ooh. And then it waits a while and does it again. Peewee, ooh. That is, even if you're not very good with bird calls, that is a good one to learn, because I could even learn it. Then we had a situation during a drought, it was about 2012 or 2011, something like that, where we had some, now this was before the wetland had been put together, and there wasn't much water around, and before the bird water feature was in also. And there were some broken irrigation spigots, and we did not report them because these birds were coming to those, even though it was using up water, these birds were coming to those irrigation spigots. This is a green-tailed towhee. We are in its range, but we are on the far east part of its range, and we don't often get to see it. And there was a sage thrasher there at the same time, not right at the spigot, but nearby. And they are not often seen here either. So it was a real catch to find these two birds, but they were probably attracted to the bubbling water out of those spigots. Urban Ecology Center is where we're going next. You can see the circle on the west side there. Here's a directional sign to it. You can see that gabion, that rock in the wire mesh, and as part of that sign. This is the Urban Ecology Center that was designed by the Lake Flato architects. And this is outdoor, and the outdoor classroom building on the other side of the park was designed by them too. Stone, wood, and so that it artfully fit into the surrounding areas. This is called the Gathering Hall there. There's an indoor classroom too. The Gathering Hall is available for rent, and it's a very nice space. And here's a path down to the underground rainwater storage close to the Urban Ecology Center. To the right of this path is what's called a bioswale. Some people call it a glorified drainage ditch. It really is a drainage ditch, but it's planted with native plants that will do well there, and it helps the water slow down and be absorbed downstream from it and into that underwater storage area. And here's a Hutton's vireo. This is a really good under the radar bird for us. It's not often seen in this area. In fact, some of the books will still say that it's only seen out in Big Bend, but we've seen it here a couple of times or several times since 2012. It's easily confused, that this is the issue, it's easily confused with the ruby-crowned kinglets that we have here. So you'll get a group of ruby-crowned kinglets, and you have to be careful that the Hutton's vireo is not not what you're really looking at. He mixes in, it mixes in with the ruby-crowned kinglets. The best thing to do, they're really hard to tell apart when you're looking at them. The best thing to do is to listen to their bird songs online or from some app before you go out in the field. And their songs are very different. So the best way to tell them apart or know that you have something different is by the song. And there are a number of trails all over the park, about 7 miles of trail. And I'm going to go through some birds here real quick that we have out there. The white-eyed vireo. You're likely to hear it and not see it. Okay, and bear with me, I'm going to do one more bird call. People describe its call as a sped up, but I'll do it slowly first. Spit, see if I care, spit. So when the bird sings, it's sort of spit, see if I care, spit, spit, see if I care, spit. So there's that chirp kind of at the beginning and a chirp at the end, and it's multi-syllables in there. So you'll often, as I say, hear it before you see it, and you may never see, you may hear five or six in the park. Doesn't necessarily going to mean you're going to see any. Here's a Cooper's hawk, often confused with the red-shouldered hawk, and they eat in the same areas. They have the same diets. Both of them come by our bird feeder at our house and take our small birds. Everybody's got to eat. I just don't want to watch it personally. They're about the same size. The red shoulders on the red-shouldered hawk are one of the main ways that you can see the difference between those two birds. And here's a Nashville warbler that we had come through this early spring before COVID-19 slowed us down in our birding. And this was on the path between the Volker Farmstead parking lot and the outdoor classroom on the east side. We were lucky enough to catch him resting in migration and feeding. So he'd already gotten kind of colored up for the ladies, is that he's going to have a beautiful yellowed breast. He brightened up for the breeding season. And then we've got a yellow rumped warbler here. Some people call them butterbutts. The yellow rump is not visible in this picture, but it would be, if he flew off, it'd be behind those wings on his rear end, and it's very noticeable. So often called a butterbutt. And we had an American woodcock, which is a great find. It was there in the winter. You can see beside it, there's a white plant that it's frostweed. And so it was a very cool morning. There had been a freeze and the frostweed had broken open with the cold, and the sap was coming out and froze. It looks like snow, but it's not, it's frostweed. So the woodcock is a great bird. And when that was seen, the jungle, what I call the birder jungle drum came on, and people were out going to look at it. And I'm going to talk about the one more bird here, and this is the photo from Laura Render, the only one in here from Laura. This is a golden-cheeked warbler. It is an endangered bird. It nests only in the Texas Hill Country. It does not, as far as we know, nest at this time at Phil Hardberger Park. It does nest just to the north of Hardberger Park in Bexar County, all up in the Hill Country from there, but Eisenhower Park has them nesting. Frederick Park has them nesting. Camp Bullis has them nesting. This one was probably just passing through in migration, getting some grub and to make its way the rest of the way on its trip to its nesting area. I just love this picture. Most of them you see are from, most of the pictures you see are with a golden-cheeked warbler from the side. This one's looking right at her. It's just great. Last thing we're going to talk about is the land bridge, and that is, Alan's got an oval around it on the map for us here. This is a map with a sketch of the bridge superimposed. They're in the process of building it right now, and it's scheduled. The original schedule gave October as a finish date. I haven't heard an update recently, but the Conservancy, Phil Hardberger Park Conservancy, puts updates on their website periodically. Excuse me. There are going to be some bird blinds on that bridge, and they're artist designed, so it's going to be public art. And there was an article in the San Antonio Express News on July 24th about those bird blinds. So if you'd like to Google that for more information, please feel free to. It's kind of an interesting story about how all that is going. So I mentioned the Phil Hardberger Park Conservancy a couple of times. It's a member-supported organization that promotes and sponsors a myriad of educational programs at the park. It also provides funds for park development and supports conservation in the park. And this spring, they did a nice video about the Wildscape demonstration garden that's available online and on their website. So the conservation always invites new members who would like to help support the park. So my last little thing here is a white-winged dove. And I'm going to go back just a tiny bit and talk about the master plan for the park. Not long, I promise. But it had 4 overriding principles. 3 of them were stewardship, in other words, taking care of this unique urban environment that we have there, learning, sharing knowledge about the native Texas environment, excuse me, and the larger environment. Just a second. Almost done. And sustainability, which is taking back that post-agricultural land and performing the inverse. So instead of taking from the land, it's giving back to the land. It's also a place for recreation, not recreation, although that's part of it, but recreation. It's relaxation and restoration for the human body as well as for the spirit. It's a place to sit on a bench. It's a place to enjoy nature. The rejuvenation happens almost effortlessly as you let yourself feel one with nature. And I'm going to leave you with that and invite you to go see the park. It is open. Certain parts of it are not open, the children's playground, etc. But you can go and walk in the park and go there for relaxation and restoration. That's what I would suggest. And I'm going to close with a poem by a woman named Moby Warren, who is a poet naturalist who lives here in San Antonio. Here's the poem. It's called White-Winged Dove. Into the day flowers, a white-winged dove flutters, hungry for black seeds, shards of crushed snail shell. When she ascends to a branch, she is a flash of crescent moons. So that's the end. She's a flash of crescent moons. I like, that just calms me down thinking about it. So anyhow, that is the end of the program. I'm going to go, let's see, I'm going to go to the resource list next. And that tells you a little bit about, more about how to get to San Antonio Audubon, the name of the full book name and that information about it. The Farm and Ranch Committee of the Conservation Society of San Antonio has some information about the historic Volker farmstead, where to find Phil Hardberger Park Conservancy, where to find the bird list, where to find out more about Alamo Area Master Naturalist Program, and then the link to the video about the demonstration garden. So, Christine, if you want to take over from here.
Hi, also, if anybody has any questions for Patsy, you need to just unmute your video and audio and feel free to ask questions. And I highly recommend you get out to this park. I definitely moved it up on my list to go visit, but please, if anybody has any questions, ask away.
I think there might be some in the chat.
There were a few, actually lots of compliments. There weren't questions, but
well, nice. Okay.
Yes.
I can't see the chat.
I have a question.
Yes.
We were walking in the park. First of all, thank you. It was a delightful presentation.
Glad you enjoyed it.
We were walking in the park yesterday morning and saw a fallow deer.
What kind of deer?
We looked it up and it was fallow, I think. It was a huge deer, much bigger than normal. And it's its snout was a little squared off, and it was had this white spots all over it, almost like a fawn.
Well, it could have been a fawn. There are a lot of fawns around that have
No,
white spots.
trust me, this was not a fawn. This was
Okay.
huge. I mean, we were, and I have two other people. One of them here is on the here, and she can comment. I'm not making this up.
Okay, I believe you. I believe. Well, isn't there an axis deer? Now, I've never seen anything but the white-tailed deer in the park, but that doesn't mean there's not something else there. There could be, I guess, an axis deer.
Jeff said it was an axis deer instead of a fallow deer, Jerry, I think.
Okay. I thought it was fallow because that's what we looked up. But you think it was axis?
Well, it's I don't even know what a fallow deer looks like. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that it's not part of my world. But yeah, I would look up axis deer. That would be more likely. And I'm very surprised. Where did you see it?
We were coming. Allison,
west.
we just passed the bridge.
We were on the west side,
Okay.
Mark, and yeah, around that bridge area, coming back.
So the bridge area you're talking about is
The land bridge.
The
Pardon?
land bridge.
the land bridge. Well, I'll be darned. Well, it could be. I think they're going to be surprised that there's anything other than white-tailed deer in there, but I'll pass that along.
Yeah.
And we got a picture of it.
Yeah, well, I believe you. I mean, I know what you saw. I mean, you're telling me what you saw. It's just interesting. I didn't know that there were any there. But thank you. Thank you. That's interesting. Any other questions?
You have lots of great comments in the chat room, Pat.
Oh, that's nice. I'm glad people enjoyed it. I really do hope that people will come over to Hardberger Park and use it in the way that they like best. It's a great place to get exercise right now. I'll tell you though, the west side is usually less frequented than the east side. At least the part of the east side close to the Salado Creek Greenbelt, because the bicyclists come through there, and part of that greenway goes through the park. So once you get off of that part of the hiking system and get back away from that, it really is pretty quiet in there. I wouldn't go on the weekends if I could avoid it, and I can usually, but mornings when it opens up, shortly after it opens up, while it's still not too hot yet at this point, it's a great place to be.
Patsy?
Yes.
I'd like to ask you one more question. You showed us the first page of the list of birds. Is there somewhere where you can go to get that list of birds?
Yeah, on this resource page, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth item down, to find the 2020 Phil Hardberger Park bird list.
I got you.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
All right, well, thank you, Patsy. That was awesome. And I'm going to try to go there next week, actually, during the week.
Sounds good. Okay, take care. I enjoyed it, Christine.
Have a good evening.
You too. Bye-bye.